Well, good evening. It is good to be here. It's good to be back. Thank you for all of you who were so kind to pray for me or drop me a note. As you know, on last week, I was unable to be here. My father died, and I had to go and preach at his funeral on last Monday in Los Angeles. And it was rather trying, and it was good to know that there were folks here that were praying for us and with us during that time. My father, and last time I was here when I preached the series on love and marriage, perhaps told you that I didn't grow up with my father. My father had abandoned my mother and me when I was a baby, when I was very small. But I always knew my father. We kept in contact, and he had some intense struggles in his life over the last 15 or 20 years. But God restored him in the last few months of his life. And the most beautiful thing happened in the last probably 3 months that he was alive. God had given us the relationship that both of us had prayed for so long. And it was beautiful. It was incredible, those last few months. And I was grateful for those last few months on last week when I had to go there and stand and do what I had to do. So just wanted you to know that I'm grateful. I'm very grateful. I don't take that lightly at all. And thank you. This week, I want to share with you something that is very meaningful to me. I want to put on the other hat. I told you in the last series that I sort of wear two hats, and one of those hats is that hat of husband and father and equipper in the area of marriage and family, and the other is that of an apologist. And apologetics, contrary to what some people believe, is not apologizing for what we believe. The word actually comes from the Greek word apologia, which we find in 1 Peter chapter 3, when Peter says that we're always to be ready to give a response to anyone who asks us the reason for the hope that is within us. And he says that we're to be ready to give an apologia, a reasoned response. And so the word apologetics comes from that Greek word, and it means a reasoned response to those who would ask us why we believe what we believe. And so apologetics in its simplest form is knowing what you believe, why you believe it, and being able to communicate that effectively to others. Knowing what you believe, why you believe it, and being able to communicate that effectively to others. Won't y'all say that with me? Knowing what you believe, why you believe it, and being able to communicate that effectively to others. And it's very important that we're able to do that. It's important. It was important for me, a week ago when life got real for a whole lot of people and death was real for a whole lot of people. It was very important to be able to communicate what I believed, why I believed it, to communicate that effectively to people who are searching for answers. And I believe that we are about to walk into a time in our culture where it's going to be important for you to be able to do that as well. Know what you believe, why you believe it, and to be able to communicate that effectively to others. This weekend, the Da Vinci Code comes out. This weekend, and I don't know about you, but I'm pumped, okay? Blockbuster book, little Opie Cunningham is the director, You got your acting crew, led by Tom Hanks, and it's going to be great. It's going to be a good movie. But here's what it's also going to be. It's going to be fuel for a fire that has been raging for a long, long time. Because here's the premise of a lot of what's going on in the Da Vinci Code, and the premise for a lot of what's going on in so-called New Testament scholarship today. And that premise is this. And we don't even have to take apart piece by piece all of the things in the film. We just need to deal with the premise. The premise is this. All of the stuff about Jesus being married to Mary Magdalene and them having a child and this conspiracy throughout the history of the church to hide all this other information, these other documents that are out there somewhere. The premise is what we have in the New Testament is incomplete and insufficient. That's the premise. What we have in the New Testament is incomplete and insufficient. And there are people who have come at it from a multitude of angles. There are some who come at it from the angle of there are all of these other books out there that were excluded. And the only books that were included were the ones that this certain select group of individuals felt would cast Christianity in the most favorable light. That, or what we have is not even a reasonable facsimile of what those early documents were, because they've been doctored and changed so many times. Translated so many times. It's another argument that you hear frequently. After all of the translations that the Bible has gone through, how could we possibly go to the scriptures and believe what it is that we read when the fact of the matter is, after so many translations, what we are reading is not even close to what was originally there? These are some of the angles, some of the tactics that people use when they're coming at the scriptures and trying to make some of the arguments that form the foundation upon which things like the Vinci Code is built. This sort of undermining of the New Testament. And if you say it convincingly enough, you get people who sit around and go, well, yeah. And if you hear it enough times, people sit around and go, well, yeah. And it doesn't matter how ridiculous it is. People still sort of feel uncomfortable. Like, let me give you one example. The translation argument. There are Christians, and I talk to people who are, they're solid believers, and they kind of go, I've kind of wondered about that. Because the Bible has been translated a whole lot of times, and I just don't know what to say when people come at me with that thing, going, because, when you translate something, you've played the game, haven't you, where you get a line of people, and one person says something into the ear of the next person, and by the time you get from person number 1 to person number 10, the story's changed completely. Here's the problem. The problem is, and this is why that is an absolutely ridiculous argument, and nobody should ever make it. But if they do, I feel obliged to inform them of the ridiculous nature of their argument in as kind a manner as I can. What that argument assumes is that you start, for example, with the New Testament, you start with the Greek manuscripts. And then the Greek manuscripts are translated, and you get, Latin manuscripts or Syriac manuscripts or whatever. And then you come down to some kind of Sanskrit or whatever. And then you come down to more modern translations. And what happens is we continue to translate these documents until we finally get to whatever language it is that we have them in. Let's say English, for example. The problem with that argument is I read from New American Standard Bible. This is actually a revision of the American Standard from around 1901. Here's what that argument assumes that is so utterly ridiculous. That what happened in 1901 was that these folks went to a translation of a translation of a translation of a translation of a translation in order to determine what this was going to say. When the fact of the matter is, whenever anybody writes a translation of the New Testament, for example, you don't go to other translations. You go to the Greek documents themselves. And if that's the case, the argument doesn't hold water. Because if you translate something 1,000 times, but you're always going back to the historical documents, you are still getting a first-generation translation. So now, instead